We will be polite. Good morning, Jarek.
Good morning, Julian, and good morning, everybody.
Hello, good morning.
Hello, Paola.
Not so many people as yesterday.
But they're coming quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Good morning. Hello, Jill. Hello, Kate.
Hello, everyone.
Okay, there's 1 minute left to 9, and we are waiting for the famous bells of Beverly Minster. I hope that we will hear them, Julian. Do you have your window open?
I will open it. It's cold, but there you are, just in time.
Oh, perfect.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning, PH.
Hey, good morning.
I asked Beverly Minster to add another hour for Polish time, but they wouldn't.
We appreciate.
I did ask. I will just go bong, and that's the Polish time.
I find these bells of Beverly Minster as a kind of symbol and tradition of our conference. Don't you agree? I think that we all associate this with a Launch Together conference, and this is a kind of tradition to wait for the bells to ring till the end and then launching another day of debate and so on. That is really something lovely, I think. Well, today this is my great pleasure to welcome you to the second day of our conference. I hope that everyone is well rested and refreshed. And I'm not sure if you remember, or even I'm not sure if you have the same tradition as we have in Poland, but today is a special day. Do you know it? It is the 1st of April. And this is Prima Aprilis. I am not sure whether, but I can now I can guess that it is a common day for all of us. So I must praise myself that I have my first trick and my first joke behind me. Poor Rafał, because it was quite cruel one. Because just to say a few words, on that day in Poland and some other countries, we are allowed to make jokes and tricks toward our friends, and with, let's say, no consequences. And this morning, shortly before the conference time, I texted Rafał that I am sorry, but I cannot come today, and please moderate the session. And the first, it was quite cruel, but successful. So but please don't worry, I'm not going to do these tricks on you during the session. I will refrain myself from the temptation. So yesterday we covered the philosophical and educational context and meanings of solitude, as well as having two thrilling plenary sessions. And today, our first session will address at solitude in culture and religion. And that is my pleasure to moderate the session. While preparing to moderating it, I reminded myself of a lovely quotation which we used with Julian. Julian, I think that you will remember the quotation. It is from Huxley. We used it in our latest article on the ineffable in education. And it is from Aldous Huxley, and it is a very lovely one. And please let me share it with you. I will read it out loud. All the things that to the human spirit are most profoundly significant can only be experienced, not expressed. The rest is always and everywhere silence. After silence, that which comes nearest to expressing the inexpressible is music. I love this quotation. It is I think it's gorgeous. The nearest to expressing the inexpressible is music. And I think it is about our first session, and especially about our first presentation, because the first speech today is on the art, literature, and music of solitude, from modernism to postmodernism, by Julian Stern, a person who needs no introduction, I am sure, especially in this community, representing the Bishop Grosseteste University in Lincoln, United Kingdom. So Julian, please kick us off with your insights and thoughts.
Thank you so much. I think I should sing my whole presentation.
You could.
But I won't. I will present, and you will tell me when I am out of time, I'm sure, Gosia. Can you see my slides? Okay. I want to talk about being at one, postmodernism, and the recovered self. It's a rather more complicated title than it deserves. I'm wanting to talk about the arts broadly in the 20th century, and the art of solitude in the 20th century. There are three figures that loom large. The first of whom is T.S. Eliot, and I don't know why I like this quotation, a very simple quotation from a poem. T.S. Eliot, great modernist poet, talking about cousin Nancy. Her aunts were not quite sure how they felt about it, but they knew that it was modern. And this is what modernism did. It was the slightly disturbing modern of the arts, particularly in the early 20th century. But to be honest, there are still modernists carrying on. The second key figure, I think the key figure for all that I will say today, is Samuel Beckett, the Irish playwright, a very characterful picture of him there. And the third, representing the postmodernist period, is the psychoanalyst and not an artist, Frida from Reichmann. But I'll mention her later on. So what I'll do, I'll talk about being at one through the history of art, music and literature. This is something that I'm writing a lot about at the moment. Being at one is the overarching idea that I am trying to cover solitude, silence, loneliness, but also oneness with the world and so on. So being at one is good, says the poet Hölderlin, and he goes on to say how terrifying it is to think there is only one. But being at one is the starting point and the end point for, I think, most of our lives, but also my work on the arts in literature. I'll talk about modernism as the high point of alienation, postmodernism, the recovery of the self in post-humanist personalism, and I'll have a conclusion as well. But starting with modernism as the high point of alienation, through the 19th century, alienation had been used to mean religious alienation, separation from God or sin, but alienation through the late 18th and then into the 19th century became a social alienation, the alienation of Hegel and then particularly of Marx, the idea that you were alienated from the people around you, from your own work even. This social alienation developed emotionally into the emotion that we now think of as loneliness, and it developed particularly through the 19th century. However, by the 20th century, the late 19th, early 20th century, the artistic movement of modernism was a sort of culmination, an end point of alienation and loneliness. It involved the loss of the personal in utopian innovation, and every so often when things are lit up, I have an illustration. The paintings, the wonderful paintings of Mondrian, are here also ultra modernist. They're not representational. They represent a technical and innovative high point of that sort of modernist art. Invention and individualism, the individualism of Picasso's tragedy, Tragedia, and Munch's Silent Scream. On the left, Picasso, tragedy, standing on the edge of the ocean, each person both trying to be connected and failing to be connected. Munch's Scream, one of the most famous of all paintings, the Silent Scream, of a high point of modernism, of we have so alienated the world, all we can do is scream. The first and last and only musical illustration I'll give, let me see if this works. I hope this works. It involves changing to a different screen. Let me see if I can get there. Are you still seeing my PowerPoint, or are you seeing, I will see if I can unshare and then share a different screen. Let me see if this will work. Yes, I hope you can now see Conlon Nancaro, a not very well-known composer, one of my favorite composers, definitely a modernist composer who wrote only for mechanical pianos, not for people to play, but for machines to play. And here is one of my favorite of his compositions. You will see how disturbingly modernist it is, I hope, and here. Well, I hope you heard that. Did you hear that? Did any? Oh, good. When I'm driving the car a long way and I'm feeling sleepy, I put on Nancaro's music, and it's very good for waking me up again. But Nankara, lovely. I'm a great admirer of his. But this is a technical innovation, a modernist innovation. John Cage, who I mentioned yesterday, I think, in a question, wrote a piece that was silent. He sat at the piano and didn't play it. Sartre, meanwhile, the great existentialist, novelist and philosopher, wrote in Nausea, "Is this what freedom is? I am free. I haven't a single reason for living left, alone and free. But this freedom is rather like death." In other words, modernism grew the alienation and the freedom and the technical achievements of the 19th century towards death. And here is Beckett as modernism's last cry from Malone dies. "But what matter whether I was born or not, have lived or not, am dead or merely dying? I shall go on doing as I have always done, not knowing what it is that I do, nor who I am, nor where I am, nor if I am." Samuel Beckett in his novels does a fabulous job of expressing how modernism at its final point is death. But also he expresses even better how postmodernism starts. He is at the turning point of modernism and postmodernism. In his next novel, The Unnameable, I'm going to try and read this, and I can't do it in a Sam Beckett accent. But here we go. "They're going to abandon me. It will be the silence for a moment, a good few moments, or it will be mine, the lasting one that didn't last, that still lasts. It will be I. You must go on. I can't go on. You must go on. I'll go on. You must say words, as long as there are any, until they find me, until they say me. Strange pain, strange sin, you must go on. Perhaps it's already done. Perhaps they have said me already. Perhaps they have carried me to the threshold of my story, before the door that opens my story. That would surprise me if it opens. It will be I. It will be the silence where I am, I don't know. I'll never know. In the silence you don't know. You must go on. I can't go on. I'll go on." Whew. Now, if you don't have English as your first language and think that that's complicated, you join all of us with English as a first language who find that complex, lost in a fog, in the unnameable fog of postmodernism, which Beckett expresses and lived to a certain extent, in a way that Martin Buber, the philosophy, describes the terror of postmodernism, of separating the I and the it. Institutions are it organizations, whereas the home, the house, is an emotional I organization. But, he concludes, the separated it of institutions is an animated clod without soul, and the separated I of feelings an uneasily fluttering soul bird. Neither of them knows man. Institutions know only the specimen, feelings only the object. Neither knows the person or mutual life. So Buber was fighting for not modernism, not postmodernism, but going beyond this postmodernism alienated self. Postmodernism was described ironically, the loss of truth, the loss of reality, as utopianism collapses. The irony still there in paintings by Banksy. This is Say It With Flowers, a wonderful piece of graffiti art, but one that is almost archetypally postmodernist, ironic. The loss of truth, the loss of reality in poetry too. They are clearly difficult in every sense, machined metallic to the tongue, the glistening eye dispersed throughout the body of a poem, openly lying about itself, the field full of folk, the truth snared, caught and taken in, the body of falsehood, the house of life. This is postmodern poetry in its way. Going beyond postmodernism, I'm hoping for a recovery of the self. Frieda from Reichmann had a more patient psychoanalysis. Rather than having a theory, a scientific theory of psychoanalysis, she said her technique was simply to be patient, to wait, to not say things, to stay quiet, with a patient until eventually they started talking. One of her most famous patients wrote I Never Promised You a Rose Garden, a novel that also oddly became a country music hit separately, of how you're, as a psychoanalyst, you may not have a theory of the patient, but wait patiently with the patient. She is the one of only 2 psychoanalysts who've written about loneliness, and she says all mental health issues are issues of loneliness. Personalism came back, or came strongly in, as postmodernism was declining. Personalism, communitarianism, religious and spiritual forms. Posthumanism came in as well, beyond the human, both human beings, people we call human beings, being posthumanist, being enhanced, or being seen as physically existing and not simply minds, and the recovery of the self in dialogue. In art, music and literature, we remember the history of solitude. Here is an art installation on Formby Beach on the northwest coast of England. There's a man on the left and a dog on the right. They were simply running past a statue by Anthony Gormley, a representational statue, a statue of a person, a very a touchable, feelable person, partly buried in the sand or the water, on the edge of the water, and not as tragic as Picasso's figures. A very different approach to postmodernist art. So, in conclusion, I think we can learn from art, music and literature. I'm learning here from the 20th century art, music and literature, and to learn through that a form of solitude lived as part of the world, avoiding perhaps loneliness becoming just a medical matter, but being expressed and understood through art, music and poetry, living alone and together. There I am. And there's our, I think of it as our conference book even, the Bloomsbury Handbook. That's what I would like to say. Am I still on time?
Thank you, Julian. You have 2 minutes.
What a surprise.
I would like to add 2 minutes are very precious minutes for many of us. Thank you very much. The time of very color, vital. I have a problem with echo, you know, it is quite distracting, but I will struggle with it. Okay, now it is better. Thank you, Rafał. Thank you again. Very, very colorful and vital picture of solitude and philosophical anthropology of solitude and alienation derived from the art and literature and music. And I think that I can say it only increases our appetite, you know, because I know that it's just a part, just a fragment of your current research project, which is much more extended. And we can say that it is really encouraging, and we look forward to reading the whole book. I hope that it will happen soon, that we will have the opportunity to get to know the whole research of yours. That was really, really fantastic. So thank you. I just want to remind you that all the questions and all the comments are welcome at the end of the session. Okay, so if you have something in mind, please write it down, not to forget, and to keep it for later. And our second speaker today is Marino Balducci. Welcome, who will speak on behalf of the University of Szczecin on collective individuality, Dante's moral, philosophical and psychological message in Paradise 31st. Please, Marino, the floor is yours. Marino, I'm sorry, we can't hear you because you are muted. Please unmute.
Okay, excuse me.
No, it's okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Wałejko, for your kind presentation. And I start to read my paper about, as you have said, Paradiso 31 by Dante in the Divine Comedy. So Dante, in his epistle to Can Grande, defines the Divine Comedy as a work of moral philosophy. In this way, he indicates that his book has mainly a practical purpose, which he presents in Latin with these words: removere viventes in acca vita de statum miseriae et perducere ad statum felicitatis. As we can read, Dante wants to help each of us to overcome existential anguish in order to achieve ideal happiness. It's a question of a psychophysical balance in which the fundamental parts of consciousness can be harmonized. The journey into the other world, described by the poet, who represents with free imagination the symbols and emotions of his own visionary transcendental experience, alludes to a precise, purifying, and liberating psychic itinerary. Hell represents the pain in which our consciousness becomes imprisoned due to selfishness. Purgatory shows a way to interact with pain, a way to use it, to transform it in order to elevate us. Finally, heaven reflects the idea of conquering our ideal state of being, which is loving, generous, and happy. Such a state represents our first origin and the necessary final goal of all human existence. Dante imagines the world as a sphere that in the north is occupied by all the emerged lands, ranging from the east, from India, to the western end of the Mediterranean Sea, that is Morocco and Spain, with the Pillars of Hercules as the extreme limit. These are the parts of the civilized world that were known in the Dantean time. The other hemisphere of our globe, the southern one, is all water, with only a small island in the center. This is the island of Purgatory, the antipodes of Jerusalem. Hell opens like a huge cone overturned under this last place, Jerusalem, which is the city where, from a Christian point of view, the greatest crime was committed, namely the killing of the Savior, Jesus of Nazareth. Descended into hell in the company of the great poet of Rome, Virgil, emblem of the wisdom of the classical world, and therefore on a psychic level, symbol of our reason, Dante reaches the emperor of the painful kingdom, Lucifer, metaphor of the selfishness that causes every human pain and anguished loneliness in generating uncontrolled passions, violence, and fraud. Specific effects which are all indicated by the 9 circles of hell. Above Lucifer, Dante symbolically turns upside down. He goes to the extreme low, where the weights of the world arrive by force of gravity. Then he changes orientation, stooping and looking for his feet, and he realizes that in going farther, his descent becomes a climb. Humility exalts in a Christian sense and drives him to the shores of purgatory. The Purgatorial Island has a high mountain which, traveling all the way through it, leads to a plateau on top, where an uncontaminated portion of the original Edenic garden remains. Here the poet, as a pilgrim representing all of us, representing mankind, striving with effort, arrives. From this beautiful garden, it is possible to ascend to heaven. In Dante's vision, presented in the last book of the Divine Comedy, our globe appears as surrounded by 9 skies that the poet crosses with his loving immersion in the eyes and conscience of Beatrice. She's the woman he has always loved among the living, and who, after her death, assists him in the transcendental experience, since the infernal beginning of it. Being the spirit, Beatrice is the spirit who summoned Virgil to help her beloved as a first necessary guide. So Virgil in Purgatory substitutes, Beatrice in Purgatory substitutes Virgil as the second guide representing faith. In the skies, Dante meets with different groups of heavenly souls who appear to him and reveal the deepest realities of the divine kingdom. His consciousness gradually amplifies and then goes beyond the last sky and Buddha, realizing that elsewhere is the primary blessed seat of those same spirits. It is the Empyrean, beyond time and space, the dimension of divine infinity, which to the uncertain eyes of the pilgrim poet seems at first a great river of light. Then it is specified as a white rose, and therefore as a convent with thrones, where all the blessed souls are seated around their queen, Mary the Virgin, who is revealed by Saint Bernard in Canto 31 of Paradise. Now I wanted to stop on some essential aspects of this canto. Here, the theme of honey is associated with Saint Bernard and his sweet Marian speech, which particularly marks his theological reflection. This theologian investigated the fundamental importance of our Divine Lady for the salvation of mankind. In his meditation, Mary appears as the door of Christ. Her humility has favored the birth of God as a man to make us all divine. That is, to bring us back to the Edenic origins and allowing us to go even further towards the infinite joy represented in heaven by this last utopian place, the Empyrean. Within the white rose, which symbolizes our return to perfect innocence, a myriad of angels, emblems of pure ideas, the pure ideas of the various divine aspects, continuously fly from one side of the flower to the other, in width and height. They look for nectar to make honey. They must therefore communicate with the psyche of men and women of all times, the heavenly spirits, to give energy and concreteness to the effort of their abstract thoughts. In other words, they need to actualize their ideas. The blessed spirits of heaven spontaneously offer their nectar, that is, their individual existential experience, which is reflected with the rays of clear light from their conscience. The survival of the soul in heaven, in a Thomistic and Dantean sense, is a form of polypsychism. The soul should survive individually in spiritual bodies, which appear identical in all respects to those of flesh, with sensations, memory, intellect, and will, even more acute than those of the living. Their bodies are material, but they are not made up of our concrete matter that dies, that which is formed by the four elements. They are rather of quintessential matter, which is called etheric, that is spiritual, immortal, and intangible because it is not concrete. Dante reveals how in the other world the dead exist with a perfect memory of the various moments of their existence, of every experience they had in the northern world while alive, in the world where we are living. These memories are sweet and painful until at the end of the purgatorial journey, they are purified in the waters of Eden to guarantee a serene access to paradise in pure joy. Thus, they subsist in God, in the infinite Empyrean, and they all look at the Supreme Creator who appears as the only star. But it has got a Trinitarian essence. God is alone, and at the same time, he is together with others in a familiar, fraternal way. The Christian idea of God as a familiar idea appears irrational, contradictory to our mortal mind that think binary and exclude opposites. Indeed, the only for us is not the many. The unique is not plural. How is this fusion between the single and the many possible in heaven? The solution is love, which takes us beyond human northern points of view and beyond the physical, mathematical rules of the world we know. In the imaginary southern realm, however real for Dante, complementary to our world, that is to say, in purgatory, in the Garden of Eden, on the summit of the purgatorial mountain, the purified souls immerse themselves in the great sea of light of paradise, with purified etheric bodies that, in their loving feelings, perfectly reflect divine love. Each in its own way, according to their personal characteristics. They are at this point in heaven totally purified, they appear like mirrors in a psychophysical sense. They individually reflect the light of passionate knowledge that comes from the divine above and exchange this light affectionately, altruistically among themselves. They enter each other. I'm about to conclude, Professor.
Yes.
They enter each other and know each other. They weave emotions and thoughts in total agreement. In this loving mirroring, everything is relativized. There is the top and the bottom between the various fragrant petals, like the near and the far. In those paradisiac reflections, though, also the distant is in the near and vice versa. There is a perfect agreement in the celestial souls. God goes to mankind reflecting himself. Mankind reflects God. Our essential purpose is fulfilled. Paweł Florensky, inspired by the Divine Comedy, compared Dante's Empyrean to the mathematical idea of the hypersphere, which includes and is included. The analogy is truly impressive and appropriate. Indeed, God includes all the souls of that rose, and they, in turn, loving him in themselves as one, but also loving him fraternally in all the other souls, can include him, also reflecting him in infinite combinations. Thus, it is constituted a true equivalence of infinity. Okay, I conclude now, and I thank you all for your kind attention.
Thank you, Marino. Thank you very much for the very interesting interpretation of the Divine Comedy. And I find it, I would say, optimistic because of the message that you give, that the loneliness doesn't have to be the last word, but is, we can say that more like temporary or apparent. So thank you for this very fascinating interpretation. And we move on to our third speaker today. This is Mariusz Strzeżek from the Doctoral School of Szczecin University. Mariusz, are you with us? You are. Good to see you. Hello. And Mariusz will present on Solitude and Mourning in the late poetry of Maria Kurecka. Mariusz, please.
Good morning once again. I try show my presentation. Can you see it?
Yes, yes, we can see it.
Great. The aim of this article is to approach the question of loneliness and mourning in the late poetry of Maria Kurecka, 1920-1989. My main intention is to recognize this problem, the central one for her output, in a multidisciplinary way. Though oftentimes incoherent to the point of being controversial, the research of the subject of loneliness leaves hardly any scholar indifferent. Artists also intensively exploit the problem of solitude, isolation, seclusion, seeing it especially as just desolation. From 1893 on, George Minuit claims it is Edvard Munch's scream which echoes as an embodiment of solitude till this day. Studying the concept of loneliness in Kurecka's literary works, I follow the methodology selected by literature expert Agnieszka Gawron. Assuming that writers tend to diagnose human condition, I dare say their divagations on men will resemble most closely tenets of the existential philosophy. In his Eros and Thanatos, Ryszard Przybylski goes as far as stating that all great philosophers of existentialism, from Kierkegaard to Sartre, were literary men. All great writers are less or more successful existential philosophers. Likewise, and Gavron deems that the most significant problems, both of human condition and status quo of literature studies, are embodied by the literary subject. One cannot define loneliness, the scholar goes on, without considering the category of literary subject. Loneliness always refers to somebody or something, an individual or a group, a phenomenon or a walk of life. From this perspective, reality will in any case surface as a subjective. As I mentioned above, in this article, my intention is to approach the subject of loneliness as it appears in the late works of Kurecka, the well-known writer and inhabitant of Szczecin in the years 1947 to 1956, a renowned translator of mainly literature of German-speaking countries, and, what essential, the wife of Witold Wirpsza, for whom the loss of her husband became the psychological end of the world. I intend to revolve despair, which she transposed into a series of poems expressing her own crying of pain. Together with Wirpsza, one of the most prominent Polish poets of the late 20th century, Kurecka translated Thomas Mann's Dr. Faustus in Polish. She is also remembered as a writer of biographical novels, essays, and autobiographical texts. Kurecka's poetic work is less known though. Only one volume of her poetry, 30 poems, 1987, has been published. It's too bad, the more so that the archives of the Pomeranian Library in Szczecin contain a set of typescripts and manuscripts with Kurecka's so far unpublished poems written after the death of her beloved husband. The poetess and Witold Wirpsza were married and lived together for 40 years, sharing both private life and literary passion. Leszek Szaruga, the son of the literary couple in question, mentioned his parents reading their text to one another every day. Kurecka's love for her husband is expressed via her poetic confession to him from the year 1984. From Land's End to John O'Groats, you are the air of my eye. You are the iris of my eye, and far and wide, you are the one and only iris of my eye. You are the heart of my heart. I have nothing but this. After Wirpsza died in 1985, Kurecka, whose grown-up children resided in Warsaw, was left alone in her Berlin apartment. She then had only 4 more years ahead to live. Her situation must therefore be considered particularly difficult. The pain of losing her beloved, the suffering caused by her unwanted solitude, the solitude which in turn magnified the poetess's suffering from the loss of her husband, as much as the awareness of her fatal illness, are all expressed in Kurowska's poem from March 24th, 1988. Within the 4 walls of my sorrow, I am slowly and silently dying. Within the 4 walls of my house, I am stealthily dying. With this lyrical statement, Kurecka deflates the power of death and dehumanizes the act of dying. Her poem is a bow to the poetic works of Alexander Watt, probably the most representative Polish literature as regards the subject of pain. This is how Krystyna Pietryk, a researcher of Watt's poetry, concludes on his literary work. Poetry brings little rescue from suffering, and neither does it neutralize the poignancy of pain. Yet poetry is the only deeply human way to confront such an experience. According to Anthony Storr, the creative imagination can heal. The artist tries to reunite with or find the lost coherence of their psyche via composing a new unity, a poem or another work of art. This is what Kurecka did to deal with her own emotional trauma, resulting both from the loss of her husband and her incoming death. In view of Juliusz Domański, the process of writing a literary work offers us the contact with the dead, which differs from directly experiencing their physical presence. The poetess sets her loneliness off via introducing her dead husband into the text, hence close to her. By making him thusly immortal, Kurecka fills her void, domesticates her fear of death, and declares that she remembers. So, you repeat, as but thin air, no matter where you came from, you were here. The above quoted poem is a conspicuous reference to Tren 10, Wherever You Are, If You Are, by Jan Kochanowski, whose literary lamentations on his daughter Ursula's death comprise a prominent model of the Polish funeral poetry. For 4 centuries, Mieczysław Jastrun writes, during which children were born and died in Poland, no other poet measured up to Kochanowski's verity and strength in expressing fatherly love. For Kurecka, the non-wakeful contact equals to a real-life meeting. She writes about the gone-by everydayness. You read the poem, so rich, so bitter, and so strange that no one here could understand it. The poetess introduces her dead husband also in the poem So Slowly, So Hard I'm Dying. And behind me, with me, next to me, I keep seeing your shadow. Later on she mentions her being doubtful about the capability of language to express suffering. What can words do? They are but rows of dead letters. Bereaved, Kurecka ends her poem asking imploringly, I don't want to be here. I want to be with you. Please take me away. In the poem Spring, Kurecka juxtaposes the joy which the budding season of spring brings with her own loneliness and despair. Spring, the greenery sprouted, the blackbird whistled in the bushes. I am standing next to my shadow and howling aloud like a dog. I have already mentioned both that loneliness can be felt despite the presence of up-close and personal relationships in one's life, and that being alone is non-synonymous with solitude. For Kurecka, loneliness was overwhelming. She writes about this feeling in her poem Heart Wall. You are no more, but they are here. Mom, give it to me. Mother, call me. Mom, get it done. Mom, put it down, alone, and mie it up to my throat. Kurecka's lyrical confession corresponds to the intimate trace of poetess Anna Kamieńska, who after death of her husband, Jan Śpiewak, also a poet, wrote in her notebook the following. On this day, I reached the edge of life and came across the wall which separates from and at once connects us to death. Bruno Howells claims that loneliness springs, among others, from situational or existential reasons evacuating from personal tragedies. Oftentimes being lonesome affects from random partings, either from personal family or tight friendships or partner, and by extension from the suffering, depression, or despair such partings bring about. Persistent situational loneliness can, as Kurecka's text suggests, become chronic. In suffering, we primarily experience helplessness, adds Tadeusz Gadacz. In one of her poems, Kurecka amazingly complains that although it is summer's peak and the fruit overflows from baskets, while flowers abound all around, so what, so what, so what? I have no one to offer them to. No one, none? Reaching out to people for the sole purpose of love makes us even more vulnerable than dependable. And so it deepens our lonesomeness, meanwhile climbs. In so doing, he refers to Freud's statement that we are never so defenseless against suffering as when we love, never so forlornly unhappy as when we have lost our love object or its love. In turn, Barbara Pilecka observes, the more important the relation is to us as individuals, the more psychological energy we activate while in it. The departure of a significant other has usually the effect of losing interest in the world around us and people. Grief fixes grievers. The researcher subsequently quotes Freud and concludes, to end the mourning process requires turning our back at the real world and taking up arduous work to get rid of the pain of loss. Tasting reality, one discovers that the beloved object is no more there. An urge appears to withdraw all our libido from the attachment to the object, the urge which ends up in a protest. Observation confirms that people never willingly withdraw from a libidinal position. Thus, their protest against such a withdrawal is so strong as to push a person to turn her back on the reality. As a result, the person clings to the object via reverie or occasional hallucinations about the departed who protect their close ones from beyond the grave or by revisiting. Kurecka never turned her back on reality entirely, as her poems suggest. Yet, the strength of her bond with her late husband was permanent enough to evoke his presence in her funeral poetry. To manipulate absence is to extend this interval, to delay as long as possible the moment when the other might topple sharply from absence into death. Kurecka must have felt it was indeed so, for she writes, "You are still here. I am still talking to you, you know? I stand alone now, I hear what you say, and it gets dark." Still, the tendency of Kurecka to linger in the libidinal position prevailed, an almost sure sign of her unfinished mourning. Being with someone is for Kurecka tantamount to having an unbreakable bond with her late husband, no matter whether in this or the other world. The lyrical situation of the heroine of this poem corresponds to that of the lyrical subject from the funeral cycle The White Manuscript by poetess Anna Kamieńska. In view of Anna Wspólna, a researcher of Kamieńska's funeral poems, death has torn this marriage asunder. Wspólna observes that the author desires to return to her lost vivaciousness, her protection against being disunited by death. Predictably, Kurecka dreamed of being reunited with her husband too. She wrote about this desire as follows: "But I want to die rather than live. But I want to die, to write no more. Drink the dark wine alone and sway along with the sound of the bells. But I want to die rather than live. It is difficult to even call it mourning. I just wish I were no more and rest in eternal peace next to you." Apart from grief, sorrow, longing for the deceased, lonesomeness, and pangs of consciousness, processing mourning also requires revealing anger, rage, and irritation. Particularly anger and irritation can be seen as expressive of the refusal to accept one's own lot. Kurecka managed to act this emotion out in her poem For Wisława. Look.
But I am sorry, we have to approach to the end. if you could please conclude your speech, I would be grateful. I am very sorry for that, but that's the right of time.
Okay. Sorrow should not be overcome alone. The sufferer needs consolation and support from their close ones. The craving for the close contact with another human being was almost organic in Kurecka. She experienced the pain of loss and solitude, and the awareness of her own incoming death only deepened the existential sense of these feelings in her. In his book, The Labyrinth of Solitude, Octavio Paz writes that death and birth are solitary experience. We are born alone and we die alone. When we are expelled from the maternal womb, we begin the painful struggle that finally ends in death. It is difficult to disagree with this statement of the Mexican Nobel Prize winner. Still, between these two extreme moments of human experience, Kurecka also sees the urge and strength typical of the human mythic and other human situation. In her parting poem, written with the profound sense of understanding for humanity, Kurecka expressed such a sense in the form of a peculiar message. Until your own hand fits into another, and you believe that, until your own eyes trustingly look into another eyes, and you believe that, until you just speak words to someone believing that, then still a man is a man to another man. Thus, eventually, solitude might be perceived as but one of human experience, hence it does not need to become a fate. There is hardly any doubt that Kurecka's lamentative cycle refines the National Library of Funeral Works. As a record of painful suffering, a chronicle of solitude and ache, as well as a confession of faith in man, this cycle revolves one of the typically hidden, intimate spheres of existence. In this context, one cannot but think of a statement Anna Sobolewska once made, namely that poetic recognition is always self-recognition, an internalization of the outside world and experiencing existence via self. Maria Kurecka expressed this conviction to the full in her writings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mariusz. Thank you very much. I am very sorry that I had to interrupt you a few times, but I know by my own experience that it is very hard to fit in the frame of time when we are fascinated by a topic and we would like to share it with others. So I know that it is not easy when we have to shorten our speech. So
I understand, of course.
I'm sorry for that. That was heartbreaking. I would say heartbreaking example of alone and together and then alone. And also a beautiful testimony of mutual, gentle and loving relationship of the couple. What I find amazing is also the fact that Maria Kurecka was known before only as a translator, right? She was not known as a poetess, and the loss revealed her new facet as a very talented and amazing poetess. So that is something really touching about the story and this works. Thank you, Mariusz, for that. And now I'm not sure if we have with us Narayan from India. Narayan, could you please give us a sign that you are here? I am afraid that we didn't see you today, or haven't seen you till now. Oh, I'm afraid that he is absent. Maybe we will try to write to him somehow, Rafał. Spróbujemy napisać. Yes. We will try to reach him in the meantime. And now I will ask if we skip Narayan's speech, we have Gillian Simpson. Gillian, are you with us? Jill.
I am, yes.
Hello. It's very nice to see you.
And you too.
Gillian, you will be presenting on behalf of the Bishop Grosseteste University, and I think that your speech, as I feel, will say out loud what many of us have in our minds constantly and all the time. And I'm so grateful that you want to mention the situation in Ukraine. So please, I will just hand you over to
Thank you. Thank you, Gosha. I just want to thank the committee as well for squeezing me in very last minute, because I've written a poem that I've pre-recorded because I hate to hear my own voice, and I hate reading my own work. But I've written a poem about Ukraine because I feel so utterly angry about the whole situation. And it really speaks to the loneliness and the silence of the victims of that atrocity that's going on right now. Just before Raphael plays the poem to you, I just wanted to say a little bit about what I've done in this poem. At the moment, I'm working on an autoethnographic project, which is making me think a lot about how my experiences tie in with academic work that I'm doing. And one of the things that has really come over to me in this is the fact that I use, and I don't know whether we all do, but I use different voices for different situations. I use an academic voice when I'm writing, but sometimes other voices come through. And as I was thinking about Ukraine and thinking about the silence, the utter suppression of the voices of the people of Ukraine, particularly the refugees who are leaving Ukraine and the people who are left in Mariupol and the other bombed cities, it makes me very angry that they don't have a voice. So I was searching for a voice that I could use for them. And one of the things that I started to think about when I was searching for this voice was the fact that in my own life, in a very small way, there are voices that have been suppressed. And one of those voices is the voice of my mother, who was of a generation. She was born during, and was a child during the Second World War, and she grew up and became a wife and mother in the generation before the feminist movement took hold. And so her voice, in a sense, was suppressed. And I really wanted to bring that suppression of women's voices that we are so aware of nowadays into this poem. So when I wrote the poem, I wrote it with the pseudonym of my mother. So when you see the poem, you will see that it's actually written by somebody called Maggie Thompson. I have taken my mother's name to give her a voice to speak for the silenced people of Ukraine. I don't really want to say any more, and I'm afraid this is just a very short presentation, but I hope that this poem speaks to you, and I'm aware that we are dealing with different voices from across the globe in this conference, and there is the problem of people who speak in English as a first language, people who speak in English as a second language, or struggle with my native tongue. And I hope that the words that I've written actually work for you as well. So I think that's all I want to say, really. So Raphael, could you play the poem, please? Letter to a Dictator on behalf of the silenced innocents, by Maggie Thompson. I want to understand how the entitlements you self-proclaim, the obscene rights-violating laws you pass for self-protection against the silent individuals whose lives you self-declare as yours, lead to a better world. I want to understand how courageous voices that speak out with love and altruism against your abominable aggression are beaten, goose-stepped into mute, inarticulate, rights-expunged captivity. I want to understand how a wonderful, free, autonomous people are pulped towards annihilation as you pursue your illegal, base-born hallucination of debauched power. I want to understand how the dismembered 9-month womb of a mutilated almost mother within a breath of delivering innocence into a broken world is fractured beyond capacity, and with her child snuffed out, while you gloat over Pyrrhic victories. I want to understand, but I cannot. I want you to understand the last word will not be the jangling of your grotesque, blood-plagued battle call, the cancerous mask that you call victory. The last word will shatter your bloated, self-serving proclamations. I want you to understand the last word will demand victory for humanity. Born of empathy, it will serve those you have sought to annihilate. The injured will be held, the dead remembered, the traumatized loved, and your hollow victories will be drowned by compassion. This is the last word. Thank you, Gosha. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gillian. Thank you for being their voice. Thank you for being their voice during that moment, the voice of people of Ukraine. And also thank you for sharing the very personal and very sensitive part of you, which relates to your mom as well. And that was really moving, very stirring. And I just want to say, I don't know whether you have the same impression, but I feel a kind of guilt because it seems strange and unfair that we live normal life. I don't know if you know what I mean. We live normal life. We conduct a conference. We have a debate. We have intellectual, discourses and so on. And so close from us, even territorially, if we feel territorially, these people have to struggle for survival and experience this cruel violence because of this bloodthirsty person. So for me, of course, we do what we can also here in Poland, and I hope that all of us try to do whatever is possible, but still, it is so unfair that we can live a normal life. So thank you, Julian, again, for very stirring presentation. I'm afraid that Narayan is still absent. Yes?
email for Narayan, a problem with connection.
And we know already that Narayan has a problem with connection, so there is still a hope that he will join us with time. We will be waiting. And next presentation will be by a dream team, as I can see, a team, probably dream team, from our university, I mean the University of Szczecin. Aleksander Cywiński, Kalina Kukiełko, and Krzysztof Tomanek, who will present on Between Solitude and Sense of Community, the project My Space by Rita Leistner.
Hello everyone. I'm really moved by the poem, and I have a problem with concentration right now, but I try to do my best. As you can see, I'm the only one because my colleagues didn't manage to come. So the funny coincidence is that I will be presenting our project alone. Maybe it will be some wind of optimism for you after that moving poem, because that project is connected with the hope and with the searching of sense of community. So I will try to share my screen to show you the presentation. And the most important question, can you see it?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, so this is the first photo, and you can see in it the Rita Leistner herself. It is made in one of the rooms in the hotel, but maybe I will start from the beginning. And the project is really connected with the solitude and with the sense of community, and rather we focused on searching the place, the space, and searching the relations with the others, because the story is on a very lonely, very destroyed people who live in some part of Vancouver. Especially, this is the downtown inside Vancouver, and we've got a couple of heroes here. Of course, the first part is the area of the city. The second is Vandu, the special group of people connected together. This is the shortcut from the Vancouver area network of drug users. And we've got the Rita Leistner, who is a Canadian photographer known mainly from her war photography. I have to push back my cat because she wants to join us. Sorry for that. DTES, the downtown east side Vancouver, is one of the most impoverished urban neighborhoods in the country. I mean, in Canada. That means a lot, because it used to be a very popular tourist spot with a strong economic backbone, but now it is renewed. It is known as a place for homeless citizens suffering from drug and alcohol addiction, and I think that this is the area which occur for the politicians, for example, as a problem, and they don't really know what to do with that, because for example, medical journals characterized DTES as a place where is the highest rates of HIV prevalence and transmission, the highest risk sex trade and drug use behavior. Of course, this is not spot which you can find in TripAdvisor or something like that, because even for the citizens of the Vancouver or Canada or for the tourists, it's perceived rather as a place for the homeless and abandoned people. Of course, we can perceive them as a group of people, and as such, they need their voice. They need to speak. They need to show us who they are and what they need to survive, to live, and to change their life. And then we've got Avandu. As I said, it's an association which gives them the voice to speak. It is one of the largest substance user-based peer organization in the world. So you can imagine that they got something about 5,000 members, as I know right now, and it's of course mostly volunteering work with the people who needs help, but also with the people who needs the safe place to take in drugs. It's really controversial, but when we speak about people who needs injections, it is very crucial to give them the place to do this, because they do it anyway, and it could be very dangerous for them to not to find the safe place. The project itself, MySpace by Rita Reisner, it's more about space than on the people, but a very specific space which gives them the place to live, of course, but also to create the relations with the others. It's based mainly on very simple photographs taken inside the two hotels, Astoria and Baltimore's. We can say that that they are secondary hotels, but you can't imagine how ugly they are. But for that people, those hotels are the most important place in the world. And Rita tried to show the rooms, to show the space, to show the things which they have. And together with that, she interviewed the inhabitants of those hotels. So she connected to two stories or two storylines. I mean, photography and the story, life stories of the interviewed person. We can say that it could be the voice which Rita gave the Vandu members, and we as outsiders can look into the DTES community and see, of course, their life struggling, but also the beauty of life itself, and the beauty of I have to use that word, fighting for the better life. I think that photos are very moving, and somehow they get just into my heart. Conclusions, because I tried to make that presentation as short as possible. We can find there mixed emotions of gratitude, loss, despair, and hope for the future. But also, I think it is very important voice for society of or culture researcher who want to look deep into the community which lives somehow inside the let's say normal society. Because for me, and I think that also for my colleagues, for my dream team, it's really crucial that in the city like Vancouver, in the country like Canada, we still have place where people live in very, very strange way, and they are pushed away from the frame of our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kalina, for your speech. When I was listening to you and listening about this project by Rita Leistner, I associated it with what Julian said during his speech at the beginning of the session. He mentioned this personalistic intention of being with a person against their alienation, just being with the person, getting to know the person, letting them be as they are, to support them. And I think that the project probably aims the same, you know, to be with the group of lost people, I can say, from our perspective, searching for surrogate of safety and sense, just being with them, and also letting the world know about this group of people, because of course we didn't know about them, about the problem. So thank you very much for your speech. And I hope that Narayan is with us already. Yes, he is. That's a good news. We are very, very glad to welcome Narayan. Narayan, please, this is your time now. And Narayan will present on tribal religion and their philosophy of life in Indian school students. Narayan, I can't see you just for now, but maybe. Yeah, I can hear you, okay. And another step will be seeing you, I hope.
Thank you. Ma'am, just I'm trying to connecting it in my laptop, because now I have connected in mobile. So just I'm trying.
Okay, so you are connected to the mobile phone. Okay. That's the solution. It's fantastic to see you.
Doctor, help me. Ma'am, just I'm trying to share my PPT.
Yes, we are just playing at the moment. Just 1 second. Yes, there it is. There it is.
Yes, ma'am. So, respected guys and Professor Julian and Dr. Rafa, so which golden opportunity offered for me. So, first of all, thank you. Actually, I'm a student here as a research scholar in University of Delhi. My voice is coming, madam. Hello.
Narayan, I am afraid that we have terrible problems with your sound, you know. Is there anything you could do to improve your sound? I know that the connection is poor, so probably you can't do anything about it. I wish I could help some. I don't know how.
I'm reading ahead from now voice is coming. Now voice is okay.
Maybe maybe it will be better.
Hello.
Let's try. Can you hear me?
Okay. Because right now I am in countryside. From presently I'm not now in New Delhi, India.
Yeah.
I'm in Madhya Pradesh, central India. Just now, where I'm working as in a field for data collection. Or this is a wholly tribal areas, completely tribal. So actually, I'm giving just background why I'm choosing this my area for research. My childhood little bit experience here. I have grown up in central India, and earliest my degree from I have done with gold medalist here, Indira Gandhi National Tribal University, where nurturing for me how to work, how to research in the field of tribal. So where from I started to identify the problem in tribal. Basically, in India, multi-diversity, multiculturalism, pluralism, everything all. But why that is need to work in tribal and the significant necessary to do in the field. So I have observed that is my own because that is the children experiences, what children experience. So here I have working in as a teacher and experiencing interactions with almost student, parents, communities, and their cultural and all spheres. So I have observed before the independence India and after the independence of India. Before the independence of India, that is the time of colonialism. British government under the our regime working. So that time, for if I come to my first slide. Front page means second slide. Tribal, very title on presentation.
Narayan.
This is fourth slide, madam. This is fourth slide. Madam, please. This is fourth slide. No. I want to second. Why is it coming, madam? Hello.
We have problems with hearing you. You know, I'm afraid that the connection is unstable, and
I think internet connection might be region.
But I think that let's try. And please, Narayan, raise your hand when you want us to move to another slide. Okay? When you are commenting, so give us a sign with your hand to move to another slide. Okay? And go on, please.
Okay.
Narayan, can you hear me? We have an idea how to. We have an idea of solution for the situation. Maybe you could record your presentation, and we could put it on our website, because today I'm afraid that it won't work. I'm afraid that it is impossible because of the sound problems, you know. We just can't hear you. And the alone will not make sense without your comment here, I'm afraid. So Narayan, if you please could record your presentation, then send it to us, and we will put it on the website of our conference. Is it?
Yes.
Does it make sense for you?
Ma'am, if I'm trying once for sharing here from my side.
Rafał,
Madam?
Rafał will send you email, and then as a response, you will send your presentation with comment, okay? We will put it on the website. Is it right?
No, madam, voice is coming?
Yeah, I'm afraid that we have to finish now because...
Okay, madam. I understood the problem. So that is my concern. Okay, then that is the conversationism. I'm being very...
we are very
fast.
We were very glad that we have you with us from far away, and we were really thrilled with your presence. But I'm afraid that because of these technical circumstances, it can't be a presentation with your voice. So let's arrange it like that. That we will add the presentation.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. Once I will try 30 minutes later when I will reach at my another internet.
Okay.
Connection. Okay. Ma'am. I will try. Okay. Thank you, madam.
Maybe it's better now. Okay.
Okay.
Narayan, are you with us still? Oh my God. I am very sorry for this situation. I don't know how to solve it. I'm afraid that Narayan is not with us anymore. I am very sorry for that, because we really wanted to hear the presentation. But let me at least present the main idea of his presentation and encourage you to watch the recording and the presentation after the conference, please. Narayan was going to share very sad to me story on a struggle, I would call it like that, of Indian people to sustain their tribal religion. Because there is a problem with accepting and acknowledging the tribal religion of people. And according to Narayan's research, because Narayan is a teacher and he works with young people, with children and youth, and it seems that they have some deep problems with self-esteem and other connected with that, because of the fact that they are not accepted and respected in their true identity connected with this tribal religion, which is very significant for them. So I was really fascinated by the problem, and I'm very sorry that we cannot share his presentation with you at the moment, but we will after all. So I think that we came to the end of our session, and I hope that I didn't omit anybody. So thank you to all the speakers for your fantastic speeches, and let me open the discussion. Who would like to ask a question or share a comment? which is also possible, of course. It doesn't have to be a question. Please raise your hand and I will see it, and then I could arrange it. Is anybody willing to ask a question or leave a comment? That, because yes, I couldn't see your hand, but
being quiet. Yeah, I enjoy all the presentation tremendously. I think, first of all, from Julian's talk and then from other speakers, I realized that there's one thing that I want to reflect on, and there may be a bit of a question. I realized that it seems to me that solitude is somehow connected to what a lot of people seem to be afraid of, such as freedom, as death, dream, tragedy. I pick out keywords from presentation, sin, pain. What I felt was tension, cry, loss, segregation, and others. So it seems that maybe I speak from the perspective of conventional wisdom. They say pain is good for art, as you know, poetry, novel, movies, music, painting, you name it. And it seems that some of the comments that people say in praise of good artwork or any work is the work is beautiful and haunting, you know. So the idea of beautiful, being beautiful and haunting suggests that it comes from some kind of pain. So that is my first reaction, my reflection. But I have this question for, first of all, perhaps my dear colleague Julian and anyone who would like to respond as well. To what extent do you think that academic work might well derive productively from pain? And if so, to what extent and what kind of pain is that?
Wow.
I'm delighted with the question.
I will start
Yes.
in pain, of course. I was very struck by an interpretation by Jonathan Sacks, who was the chief rabbi in the UK until quite recently, of the Adam and Eve account, and other people who've interpreted, psychologists who've interpreted it. Adam and Eve lived in guilt and pain following their expulsion from the Garden of Eden, eating of the tree of knowledge. Now, some people see that as about sin, understandably, and about punishment for sin, but other people see it very differently, see it as when we learn, our lives are changed. We become culpable for what we have learned. We become responsible. We learn in ways that may hurt. We learn from bereavement and sadness as well as from joy and pleasure. But learning changes us and doesn't settle us always, doesn't bring us always to a happy land, but it brings us to a wiser place, a more engaged place in the Garden of Eden, engaged with agriculture, giving birth to children. This was what some people call a punishment, but others might say you have become an adult, you have become engaged in the world. So I think I see learning in general, and you talked about academics, and as a researcher, I'm just a learner. As my students are learners, I just get paid more for it. But learning can involve pain that isn't a punishment, but that is the pain of culpability, of responsibility, if you like. So I don't think all learning comes from pain or all art comes from pain, but I think learning and art both may involve pain if they involve real engagement. How else could it be?
Thank you, Julian. That's a beautiful thought.
Thank you, Julian. If I could add one sentence from my side, just taking advantage of my role, that I can give voice to myself. I remember a friend of mine, when my kids were smaller than they are at the moment, but I learned something very precious from the person. Every time their kids faced something difficult connected with a kind of suffer, like an injection, medical treatment, saying I'm sorry to somebody, we all saying that, and so on. This young man didn't present it as something difficult, terrible, and so on, but as a challenge and as a fascinating task. And I remember the way she was saying that to her kids. It was, she looked into their eyes and said, "Oh my God, that is a fantastic challenge in front of you. I believe you will go through it successfully. That is a chance for you. That is a great task for you." And it was amazing because I realized that everything what is difficult might be presented as something positive and another stage of our development, as Julian said. And thanks to that young man by the name of Mirosława, I'm really grateful because that was a great lesson for me. How can I also present what is difficult in life to my children, to myself, as a challenge, as an opportunity, and something that can lead me to greater development and to fulfilling my deep aims. Thank you very much for the question as well.
I like the way you put it, as challenge being opportunity, and that is part of pain, isn't it? A kind of, can be pleasurable. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Thank you once again. Do we have anybody else who would like to ask a question or leave a comment? I can see Julia, please. Julia Karapuda from the University of Szczecin.
Hello.
Hello.
I asked for the floor, but I have no question. I would just like to say that each of the speeches I have heard is very important and very inspiring to me. And I would like to thank you for the opportunity to hear so many wonderful people yesterday and today, and so many interesting speeches. So thank you very much for this meeting.
Thank you, Julia. I agree wholeheartedly with you, and I feel privileged that I can, and moderate this session, really. Do we have another? No, Rafał is waving at me that there's the end of time. He's strict, and I'm afraid of him, so we finish at the moment. Thank you very much. And I think that, yes, there is the high time to start another session. So I'm handing you over to Annie Webster, who is going to moderate the next session. I'm afraid we have to give up or break, but I think that is not a very huge crime when it comes to online conferences, because everyone can leave silently without being noticed. So
I was just about to say that I've been informed that, as far as I know, Marissa is unable to be with us today, so we might have time for a short break if we wanted it.
Oh, that's a good news. Okay, so what about, we have 11:15. I don't know. What do you think, Julian and Rafał? I must consult with another organizers. 11 would be a good moment to start another session. 11 in 15 minutes.
I'm afraid I might suggest a shorter break, just because I think we will fear we might then run over in the next one.
Okay.
So perhaps a 5 minutes break for comfort and to get another coffee. And
all right. Thank you once again. Thank you very much. See See you later in 5 minutes. Malka, we can see you. Maybe you would like to switch your camera off. Malka, can you hear me? Oh, Malka. If you would like to switch your camera off, probably, because we can see you at the time. And
I have a question. Can you see my presentation? Does it work?
Yes, yes, I can see it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, Julian, do you think we should make a start? Okay, welcome everyone. So I'm very much looking forward to the sessions that we will have, the talks that are coming up. The theme that's going to be grouping these talks is going to be about thinking of solitude and loneliness from an educational perspective. We've got a really great range of different lenses and views on particular aspects of education. We said that unfortunately Marissa is unable to be with us today. So we will be starting off with, and please everyone, please do forgive me if I make any mistakes with your names. We'll be starting off with Katarzyna Wronska from Poland, who will be thinking about solitude and meeting in education, a balancing act in being oneself, being with oneself and being with others. So Katarzyna, the floor is yours when you're ready.
Thank you, Amy. I am simply Kate. I like this English form of my name and I use it often. I will start with a quote from Marco Malvaldi novel Measure of Man, where the main character of it, Leonardo da Vinci, says, quote, "If you will be alone, you will always belong to yourself. But to live alone, as I understand it, you have to live among people. Out of all prisons that I am able to imagine, the worst would be a desert," unquote. This is the motto of my speech. Normally, I'm a supporter of solitude, but today my view of it is different. Generally, I and we can describe it as a space for thought, reflection, as a dialogue with oneself. But today our experience of being with oneself is rather problematic. We are surrounded by uncertainty. War is close abroad. We are afraid. In being with oneself, we are inclined towards those who need our help. We ask ourselves how to act. How might we help? When will this cruelty end? And how to stop it? How to explain its occurrence? The moments of being with oneself lose the status of an experience which brings joy and fulfillment. They are filled with concern and opposition to suffering and war. We also still live in the shadow of pandemic. We are surrounded and saturated with more loneliness, abandonment, loss, isolation, sadness, anxiety, and refusal to accept the suffering of those close to us than solitude. Solitude requires a peaceful setting and not war. Loneliness and fear, though not necessarily arising from the same causes, become also the lot of children, while they do not experience war trauma like adults. They experience fear, uncertainty, and suffering in the spheres in which they are lonely and isolated. This is vividly depicted in Norina Hertz's Lonely Century, where she describes the universal phenomenon of contactlessness, the being together and yet apart of people, glued to the screens of their devices, or the abandoned city. The pandemic has only exacerbated those phenomena which have been observed by us previously. Hertz asks how abandoned ties might be reforged. I am also interested in this, but besides that, my question is how to save solitude? I will try to answer it in my speech. For solitude to be meaningful, meeting the other face to face has to be an accessible alternative. Ties with loved ones, the experience of closeness, meeting people face to face, and learning trust are crucial for child's development. This is also what makes solitude accessible. From such a perspective, school becomes another site for meeting and dialogue after the family. We need balance in being with oneself and others as a way to cope with feelings of contempt, hatred, bias, and the uncompromising hostility towards opponents of our convictions and worldview, or views promoted by the government and its representatives, media politicized by state doctrine, or the schooling system. We need education as a plane for and the practice of leveling those binary viewpoints and the exercise of acquiring a tolerant stance, openness towards and the acceptance of different views, preferences and systems of value, as well as difference itself by means of relationships with others, which break this binary. Alone or in front of a screen or desktop, this cannot succeed. On the contrary, we rally even more to that which we accept as our own, to what is tame and accepted by others who identify with a certain view. Dialogue requires an affirmative stance towards the interlocutor, provided that we bond with them relying on trust, proximity, and emotions, guaranteeing a sense of safety. Dialogue not only has a positive emotional load, but can also stimulate thought. Without such a basis, we arrive at a conversation which may transpire in a civil manner, but might also become a dispute, polemic, or quarrel. Educational dialogue is a conversation with the child, held within a framework created by the parent or educator on the basis of their responsibility for the child. That is a one-sided relationship. Dialogue itself, however, is a mutual relationship based on trust, the keeping of hope. Building on this experience of trust and hope in someone's presence, loyalty, solidarity, and care, one can experience solitude as being with oneself and conversing with oneself, which, as its basis and prototype, has conversation with someone in whom we trust. Polish philosopher Józef Tischner says, dialogue is the onset of thought. Genetically, yes, he's right. Introspection, self-knowledge, and conversing with oneself constitute but one of our aspects, the counterpart of which is openness to a relation with others. Not talking only about themselves, they might tell us something about us. Through conversation with them, we might indirectly learn about ourselves through how we interact with them, what we are inclined or disinclined to do for them, and what they expected of us. Therefore, Self-knowledge imparted by solitude, being with oneself, requires the other, who not only uncover their own world before us, but also make accessible the truth about ourselves. If we want to make room in education for meeting and being with each other, and for practicing them from an early age, it will not happen without a revolution in this field, also at school, because without school, we will not be able to do it. These are new learning spaces. We associate today's school mainly with the transfer of knowledge, skills, and social competences that will enable a good start in life and further success. So, apart from teaching and learning something for ourselves, we also need to teach and learn to be with others, for others, to meet face to face. In this field, very helpful could be the philosophy of dialogue, Buber's, Levinas, Tischner's, for example. But we can also reach for entire tradition of Erziehung. In 1939, Martin Buber presented his concept of education of character, über Charaktererziehung, at the conference at Palestinian teachers in Tel Aviv. It was a warning both against collectivism and against individualism. Later, in 1925, at the educational conference in Heidelberg, he spoke about education, Rede über das Erzieherische, pointing to its dialogical nature. For Buber, education is a relationship of mutual giving and receiving, but at the same time, he classifies it as a distinct dialogical relation based on a concrete and not mutual experience of inclusion. Beside friendship as a concrete and mutual one, and intellectual abstract dispute with someone, which is abstract one. Quote, the educator stands at both ends of the common situation, the pupil only at one end, unquote. In the texts of Levinas, Tischner, as the representatives of the philosophy of the face of the other, we can read about what is revealed in it. This face says, you won't kill me. So first, I listen to whoever is talking to me. I read his, her face. Then I think about him, her, with him, her, and we think about a world together and can act together. It is the face of another that calls, dictates what to think, what to do. Not a rule, speaks Buber in Education of Character. There are no ready-made rules that can be used to answer a specific question addressed to us. When the student asks about something, we answer, as educators, we answer by looking at the context of the question, according to what will be appropriate in a given situation. This is where the meeting and dialogue takes place. So we need a new perspective in our lives and in education. What the face of the other is saying to me, not the screen, and not what I think about it in my comments, but what I can do for the other, not for myself. Let's change it. this is also a challenge facing today's philosophy of freedom. So not only do I allow myself to be others, but I meet them, learn from others, listen to what they want to tell me. Then I think and act. This arrangement protects the philosophy of freedom from being jammed by the ideology of liberalism. In the philosophy of freedom, from today's perspective, I'm supposed to see the other person and read what her face says to me. As a liberal, I stand for priority for sensitivity, readiness to repair the world, and to bring relief to the suffering. The first is agatology. This is the first moral obligation in response to the assessment of the situation. It is bad. It should not be like that. I see suffering, injustice, robbery, rape, attack. This must be remedied first. Then the time will come for self-development, improvement, self-realization, and to choose from among the preferred values. So later will be axiology. This is a concept of Joseph Tischner. These are the tasks facing today's education and democracy in the face of the war on our borders and the presence of millions of refugees in our cities and schools, and still in the shadow of pandemic. Unless education is ready to carry out the new tasks, explicitly formulated in some currents of the Erziehung tradition, including Buber, Levinas, Tischner, and in some of the character education concepts, shouldn't not be referred to as education, not only training or teaching. But I hope education has a sense, has its meaning, and has a future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katarzyna. Some really interesting comments about learning from the other that strike me as extremely topical given the current context, both of children in the pandemic when they were kind of on their own, particularly some of the comments about learning behind the screen as well. And your reference to character education made me think, you know, in the UK context, there's been quite a big emphasis on character education, but that often gets lost in translation in the product of the classroom where there's a big emphasis on knowledge. So the characters sometimes get lost behind this knowledge and transmission model that has come out, despite how important it is. So we now turn to our second speaker of the session, Jarosław Horowski from Poland, who's going to be thinking about education for marriage as education for loneliness. So the floor is yours whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. I want to say that I am very happy that we can meet again. So I am very grateful the organizers for preparing this conference. The title of this presentation, I hope you can see it. Yes?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. The title of this presentation seems to contain the pessimistic thesis, according to which the marriage, although perceived as a way to overcome loneliness, is connected with the experience of it, and consequently, maturing people should be prepared for this experience. However, when putting forward this thesis, I don't intend to arouse such pessimistic associations. This thesis is put from the perspective, on the one hand, on the tension between loneliness and relationality, communality, and on the other hand, from the perspective of the awareness, thus that this aspect of functioning in a relationship, which is the experience of loneliness, is omitted when preparing for marriage. This reflection is aimed to justify the thesis that education for loneliness is an important aspect of education for building a marriage community. So I don't want to answer the question how to prepare for loneliness in the marriage, but I want to justify that it is necessary to prepare for it. The reflection will be divided into three parts. In the first part, I want to discuss two models of marital relationship. Although marriage is called a formal union of two people, this form can sanction relationships built in various models. They can be placed on the axis between individualism and personalism. Relationships built in the collectivist model are currently less common, and I will not discuss it because the lack of the time. In popular culture, individualism is associated with limiting relationships to short-term, contingent ones, and avoiding long-term relationships. In reality, however, the essence of the individualistic attitude is not to avoid long-term relationships, but to build selfish relationships for which the point of reference is the benefit achieved by people adopting such an attitude. As a consequence, individuals with an individualistic attitude are able to build long-term relationships if they meet people who meet their needs, who are a source of pleasure and satisfaction for them. For example, those that make it possible to achieve their life goals. In such relationships, the spouses are in some sense explicitly or implicitly treated instrumentally. The end of such relationship may be the moment when the spouses are no longer able to satisfy the needs at a level that is satisfactory for individualists. And people appear on the horizon of individuals' lives, thanks to whom greater pleasure and satisfaction can be achieved, and the realization of another life goals became possible. The personalistic attitude in marriage, in turn, is expressed in concern for the spouse. Persons adopting a personalistic attitude and getting married make a decision about caring for other persons. It is a decision that the spouse's best interests will always be considered in their life choices. Consequently, their spouse's life goals became their life goals. As long as they both want to take care of each other, the decision to marry leads to the identification and implementation of common goals. One might even risk saying that the spouses don't have individual goals. This statement requires some clarification, because each of the spouses doesn't cease to pursue individual goals. For example, each each pursues an individual career path or have an individual hobby. However, when people who care for each other get married, they support each other in their professional development or enable each other to pursue their passions for example, by temporarily taking over the household duties of another person. This is why it can be said that spouses pursue common goals. The professional success of one spouse is indirectly made possible by the other spouse. For a person with a personalistic attitude, the decision to get married is an expression of the will to care for a spouse even when that person, due to illness or other circumstances, becomes unable to make a greater contribution to the pursuit of common goals. The spouse is therefore treated as an end in itself and not as a means to achieve other goals. It is worth noting that the loneliness of the parties of the marital relationship is assumed in individualistic models. Spouses adopting an individualistic attitude pursue their life goals alone. These are just their individual goals. They must persuade their spouses so that they can use their spouses' physical or mental qualities to achieve their personal goals. They can, in a peculiar way, buy consent to this use, offering their spouses in return the opportunity to use the physical and mental properties at their disposal. Loneliness in the personalistic model seems to be overcome because the life goals of the spouses overlap with each other, so they support each other in achieving them. Marriage can be experience of loneliness. The point of reference for the analysis conducted in this part of the presentation is the personalistic model of marriage, due to the fact that loneliness seems to be overcome in it. However, in real, loneliness can be experienced at different stages in the development of the marital relationship. The focus will be on 3 stages: of preparation for marriage, of the duration of the marriage, the period in which the marriage relationship lasts, but common goals are realized only by one person due to illness, disability of the other. The first period includes the time of searching for a person with whom marriage would be possible. Loneliness at this time is something natural and even fundamental, because the experience of loneliness is an inspiration to look for a person thanks to whom this loneliness could be overcome. Therefore, it is difficult to assume that the search could be started if loneliness was not experienced and experienced as a difficult, unacceptable state. The second period covers the duration of the marital relationship. It has been stated above that individual goals became common goals to the extent that even one person's professional career is made possible directly or indirectly through the involvement of another person. The duration of the marital relationship could therefore be seen as a time of overcoming loneliness. However, in fact, despite the spouse's pursuit of common goals, individual goals are also identified and considered. In other words, even people who made a decision to get married, that is, to care for other people, including care for their life goals, have to face numerous dilemmas on a daily basis regarding goals contrary to common goals, and experience situations in which their spouses face similar dilemmas. The dilemmas mentioned here arise when the person building the marriage relation sees the possibility of pursuing new goals, but there is a conflict between taking up such a challenge and achieving common marriage goals. When mentioning of the conflict, I don't mean new challenges that could be included in the goals jointly pursued by the spouses, but especially those challenges that are attractive to one person, but their pursuing leads to a break in the marital relationship. A person deciding on the dilemma of this type has to face this challenge alone. On the other hand, the spouse who doesn't deal with the dilemma mentioned here also experiences loneliness because the person with whom the marriage relationship has been built so far and common goals are pursued must in new circumstances confirm the pursuit of common goals, that is, their commitment to achieving them at a given moment is uncertain. The third period, marked by the experience of loneliness, begins when one of the spouses cannot pursue their common goals, for example, as a result of an accident or illness and consequently disability. I will omit this part because of the lack of time. So, preparation for loneliness should be associated with preparation for marriage. I want to show it in the necessity of it in two periods. In the experience of loneliness, if the experience of loneliness is a part of building a marital relationship, preparation for marriage should also include preparation for loneliness, especially in the situation described above. Firstly, it is preparation for acceptance of the loneliness associated with the search for a spouse. The main threat to this time is in a person's life is making hastily decisions, the consequence of which is perpetuation of loneliness. Such an effect can be caused by a marriage based on an individualistic model. Striving to avoid loneliness, perceived as an unpleasant state, can lead to building a relationship with a person who will treat this relationship instrumentally and with whom common goals cannot be discovered. In the marriage relationship, if the marriage relationship is to be a way to overcome loneliness, it must be built on personalistic model. The process of building such a relationship must be well thought out. The decision should be prudent. This takes a time during which the person who wants to make a prudent decision should accept loneliness. Since educating for marriage is first preparation to make a wise decision, education for marriage is combined with preparation to accept the experience of loneliness so that the decision is not made lightly. Secondly, the identification and implementation of common goals in a marriage are a consequence of the recognition of each of these goals as their own by both spouses. This decision is not made only once. This decision consists of many everyday decisions in which the spouses resolve dilemmas related to the achievement of individual or shared goals. These types of dilemmas can only be resolved by the spouse who is faced with the dilemma. It is not possible for an existential question asked by one person to be answered by another and on behalf of the former. Consequently, education for marriage requires preparation to make decisions that each side of the marriage relationship has to face alone. Thus, education for marriage also requires preparation to accept loneliness when the other spouse faces the dilemma described here and is not fully committed in achieving common goals. Each spouse needs this time because goals are shared only when they are chosen and pursued by each spouse. Firstly, it is possible that the dilemma between individual goals and shared goals will be resolved in favor of individual goals. In such a situation, two scenarios are possible: either the breakdown of the marriage or the subordination of the other spouse to the spouse who chooses individual goals. Preparation for loneliness is preparation for consenting to be abandoned. A person who is not prepared for this and who wishes to remain married at all costs may consent to the realization of such personal goals by the spouse that are contrary to common goals. Consequently, she agrees to submit to her spouses and be a means for her to achieve some of her goals. It's a kind of consent to be abused. Thirdly, preparation for marriage is also preparation for the time of illness and death of the husband, wife, as well as preparation for the time of mourning. We have discussed the problem today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Lots of really interesting ideas there. So it was something I'd never thought of, kind of the link between marriage and loneliness. I think marriage is so often conceptualized as the opposite in terms of a shared pursuit, and that it's really interesting thinking about how loneliness is embedded in and needs to be prepared for. I particularly like the models of marriage, found that a really interesting way to conceptualize and visualize those models. So thank you very much. I'm sure there'll be many questions around that. So we move on now to our third speaker, Ava Alabi from Poland, whose title is To Be or Not to Be Alone When the Other is a Pine Tree. So Ava, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let's see if I can share the screen. Can you see the screen?
Yes, I can see.
Or the PowerPoint?
Yes, I can see it now.
So, sorry. Okay, thank you. My name is Eva Alerby and I'm actually from Sweden. I'm a professor of education working at Luleå University of Technology in the very north of Sweden. The university is located just below the Arctic Circle. And even though my field is education, my paper here, the presentation, can be seen as a pan-disciplinary paper or maybe as an interplay between philosophy of education and nursing philosophy. Because this paper emanates from an article I published together with a colleague of mine, Åsa Engström, and she's a professor in healthcare. And that article, The Pine Tree, My Good Friend, The Other is More Than Human, is published in Nursing Philosophy last year. So the example taken in this presentation is actually from the field of healthcare, but on a general level, it can be seen as an intertwining between education and healthcare. So I will start this presentation with a quotation of the person who is in the center of the presentation. I had a friend. I know it sounds weird, but there was a pine tree just outside the window of my room. A person with COVID-19 in a corona intensive care unit at a Swedish hospital expressed these words in connection with a follow-up interview concerning her experience during the period of illness. The person, let's call her Elizabeth, was in her late 50s, in good health and working full-time in a service-related profession when she got infected with COVID-19. After first contact with the local healthcare center, she was transported to the corona intensive care unit and was immediately taken into care. After 11 days on a respirator, Elizabeth had to stay another 2 weeks in the hospital. And it was during this time, isolated and alone in the room, feeling lonely, Elizabeth noticed a pine tree outside the window. A tree that became her friend and lifeline to the world. The overall purpose of this paper is to discuss, exemplify, and illuminate the complexities of humans' need and desire to have a relationship with the other, especially when the other is more than human, such as a pine tree. And furthermore, the phenomenon of loneliness and its relation to the need and desire for togetherness will be outlined and explored. The fundamental ambition is to discuss and generate insights into various understandings and beliefs regarding the relationship between a human and a tree, and discuss the significance of whom or what the other might be. Elizabeth's words in her narrative will be explicated throughout the paper and will also form the foundation of the philosophical interplay as an approach to challenge and provoke diverse ways of understanding the other as more than human, and also the complexities of loneliness. The human and nature, an intertwined relationship. Nature, such as trees, is of great importance for humans, and it's evident that being in or in close connection to nature has a positive impact on people. Many studies, however, mainly focus on people being in nature, but there are also studies that recognize the importance of viewing the nature as a spectator, especially in connection to hospital stay. Studies have shown that having the opportunity to view nature through a window, for example, a wild forest or a landscaped garden, persons, for example, hospital patients, but also others such as school children and students, experienced less stress, enhanced frame of mind, and improved mood. And according to Martin Buber, relationships not exclusively has to be between humans, but might also be between human and nature, such as in this example, a pine tree. And to meet and be in nature in the forest, a stroll around the trees is of significance not only for a person's well-being, but also for their sense of belonging. Affective encounters with the natural environment can contribute to the feeling of kinship and intertwining between the self and nature, which in turn leads to another view of nature. And Margareta Häggström, a Swedish researcher, argue, among others, that trees can be animated. And similar relationship with the pine tree is Elizabeth expressing. I saw my pine wave good night every night, and it was ready for me in the morning, sometimes rocking in the wind, sometimes sparkling in the sunshine, and even white with snow. Loneliness is always part of human life. It belongs to our existence, and as human we cannot avoid it. According to Karin Dahlberg, loneliness as a phenomenon is characterized as transcending the immediate situation containing loneliness. While Elizabeth was critically ill and felt lonely in the room, she experienced safety in the presence of the pine tree, which gave a kind of consolation. It was someone she could communicate with, a connection to the world and life that goes on regardless of her illness. Gagliano emphasizes that plants, such as trees, have the ability to communicate, which Elizabeth also exemplified in her narrative. The pine tree, for example, told her what the weather was, as was shown in the previous quotation. Karin Dahlberg also stresses that the phenomenon of loneliness can only be understood by framing its outer horizon, which in turn is the companionship without which one is lonely. And as highlighted earlier, Buber emphasized that as human, we have both an ability and responsibility to relate and bond to a world consisting of more than human. Feelings of loneliness can, however, can also emerge in the midst of a group of people. And this has been studied by, for example, Karin Dahlberg, as I mentioned here, in healthcare situation, and by, for example, Julian Stern in educational situation. And in such a situation with a lot of people around, Elizabeth expressed the feeling with the following words. It was staff who came in, but they did what they were supposed to do. Someone once sat and talked to me, held my hand when I was a little sad. It happened that I was. So it has been the most fantastic care of all, but still, I was very, very lonely anyway, and then I had my pine tree. In terms of loneliness, Elizabeth expressed feelings of being alone, even that there could be several persons, staff, nurses, doctors, etc. around her. And if there are too many people in a room, and that independent of the room is a hospital room or a classroom, it may be difficult to establish interaction and connection with a specific person with whom to really sense and build a friendship. A feeling of loneliness can also occur in if the caring staff or if the teacher do not understand the patient or the student's needs and questions. And Frank suggests that sharing difficult experiences seem to be the easiest way to live with them, and Elizabeth shared her difficult experiences and loneliness with a pine tree. Being all alone in a hospital room, as was the situation for Elizabeth, decreases the sense of togetherness. Elizabeth was alone in the room without her family and friends and their fellowship, but she was also separated from all other people usually encountered during an ordinary day. And that in turn may lead to a feeling of being excluded from participating in the world. In this situation, the pine tree became Elizabeth's connection to the world, a friend who never left her side, and Elizabeth felt that she wasn't alone. To conclude, nature, for example, trees, is of significance for humans' well-being and feelings of belonging, and therefore also for learning, for education, and for healthcare. Some even argue, as I mentioned before, that the tree might be animated, and Häggström raises the issue that maybe intersubjective meetings between humans and plants, such as trees, are not as controversial as it might seem at first sight. Instead, she argues that it's a question about how communication is defined and how adapted one is towards unknown forms of communication. Of significance is instead the ability and sensitivity to actually view the other for its otherness and not narrow the other to the same. In the case of Elizabeth, it's evident that she experienced and valued conversation and togetherness with the pine tree outside her room, a pine tree that became her friend during her hospital stay. Elizabeth's friendship with the pine tree decreased her feelings of being lonely, and this in turn indicates the essential need to identify and address these issues, as there is a profound relationship between loneliness and well-being, which in turn affects learning situation. A tree outside the window can symbolize freedom and a kinship with one's familiar world. And finally, there are embedded complexities in humans' need and desire to have a relationship with the other, human and more than human. An issue of significance to discuss, consider and reflect is therefore whom or what the other might be. And for Elizabeth, while she was critically ill and no one was permitted to visit her, the other of importance was the pine tree. And therefore, I will leave the last words of this presentation to Elizabeth. I definitely don't want to get critically ill again. It was a difficult period, but I can long for the moments I had with my pine tree. My plan is to go and visit my friend on occasion. It was us against the world. Thank you for listening. And yeah, here is the references used in this presentation. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ava, and apologies. As Ava said, she is from Sweden, not from Poland. That was my mistake.
No worries.
My mistake. But thank you. A really interdisciplinary kind of intersections between nursing and education. And I know from my area of literacy and children's literature, I'm already thinking about the links between nature and people within literature, and how nature is often a companionship, plays that role for children as well. So we move on now to our final talk of the session. So Barbara Zakowski, who is from Poland, will be talking about the international education programs as a medium for bringing together alone cultures. So Barbara, the floor is yours.
Hello. Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me well? Yes. Okay, so I will try to share my screen. Just a second. All right, can you see the presentation?
Yes, I can see it now.
Great. Okay, so it's my pleasure and honor to be among the prominent speakers in this session and generally on the conference, so thank you very much. The title of my presentation, I wanted to underline or introduce the importance and the role of international education programs. As you can see, and Amy said, it's the international education programs as a medium for bringing together alone cultures. And as a researcher, I'm looking in this field of international education programs, and I have to admit that being in this conference and preparing for the presentation is programs in national schools. The topic I chose for today's presentation also comes from my experience as a teacher in the international school here in Szczecin, where I spent almost 10 years as a teacher. So I would like to move all of us in our thoughts and imagination to school. So imagine that behind this door you can see on the slide, there are children, 20 children from all over the world. The children aged 8 years old, so quite young. And they are from all over the world, as I said, from Europe, from America, from Asia. It means for the teacher, for us, for adults, that they all come from different countries, from different religions, from different cultures. They have different backgrounds. And the first question that appears actually to me as a teacher that is attending to come in, is how I'm going to communicate with them. So I know that some of them can speak English quite well. Some can speak English enough to communicate, but there are still a group that cannot speak English at all. Because they were born in the country where they spoke only mother tongue language. What is more to imagine that this school year is the first school year for all of them. And as you can probably imagine, it's quite difficult situation for them, because they can feel afraid of many things, afraid of new challenges, new people, new places, new routines. And it's also possible that all of them may also feel alone, because they feel different, they feel misunderstood, they feel sad, because they miss their former life. And the question is, what can we do to bring together these alone cultures, to reduce this limit, or just reduce or limit the distance between them? And the question is not only at the primary level of education, but I think also at the higher level of education. So what we can do? Well, we have to open the door and we have to come in. This is the first thing, and be ready to face the challenges. So international education programs that have been appearing around the world can become the handy tool in coping with cultural differences and connecting people from all over the world, because international schools with international programs, this is also my opinion, are no longer just schools for children of the diplomats, immigrants, but also the place of creation for new educational reality and the meaning of education itself. I would like to guide you starting from this broad concept of international education in order to narrow the view by going to international school, then defining the student and learner profile in this education, in this international school. And finally, I would like to present international mindedness as a way of bringing together alone individuals. So, to meet, to communicate with one another, to consciously notice and understand others, firstly, I ask the question, how do people develop a sense of self and understanding of others? And of course, much of this starts in early childhood through this attachment with their caretakers, with parents. And through this relation, children learn acceptance and understanding of self and the others. And of course, the experienced relations have to be positive to develop this healthy emotional part of ourselves. And the key is the relation. The relationships and the relation are really also important generally in teaching and at school, but in 100%, I'm sure that are fundamental in the teaching in the international community, because they are building blocks of self-understanding and the acceptance of others. Because cross-cultural awareness and appreciation of diversity are keys to global citizenships in 21st century, international education has become even more important approach to preparing students for full and purposeful lives as global citizens. And students attending international schools are expected to, first of all, develop and then transform their attitudes and beliefs to those which they are in tune. So, in other words, it can be said that international education should teach about peace, democracy, and human rights in order to enable every person to promote international solidarity and cooperation, which are necessary in solving world problems. And now going to school, international school. So being an international school goes beyond being one that displays all the flags from all over the world, or has an international head or principles, or celebrates all global festivals, or serves international food in the canteen, which is always very tasty. It is more about developing an international outlook. And of course, there are plenty international programs around the world, but the most famous, the most popular, I think, and the oldest one, I think, it's the International Baccalaureate that offers a unique educational experience to students from age 3 to 19 through international education programs that challenge and motivate students academically and personally as well. And I'm not going to talk about the history of IB and its organization, but I would like to focus on the learner profile. That is the key to develop the understanding and make connection between each and everyone. So the stated mission of IB is to develop a student that is defined by the learner profile. And this profile translates the IB mission statement into a set of attributes that are going to be developed in the learner. And the learner is going to be an inquirer, knowledgeable thinker, communicator, principled, open-minded, caring, risk-taker, balanced and reflective, a young person, generally a young person with all these attributes who can help to create a better and more peaceful world through, and this is really important, intercultural understanding and respect for the whole community. And in connection to learner's profile, the students in international education possess an ecological worldview, a belief in the unity of humankind and interdependence of humanity at the same time, support universal human rights, have loyalties that extend national borders, and are futurist. So the IB learner profile is strongly linked with the core element of international mindedness and embedded in the approaches to teaching and to learning as well. And across the world, within both national and international curriculums, this concept of international mindedness, you can see on the slide, is becoming increasingly embedded within education. However, so international mindedness in education, so much needed, it's quite difficult to define. And like it has a lot of meanings. It can be understood as a global world-mindedness, or it can be understood as an attitude and a way of thinking and being. Also, on the other hand, international mindedness can be understood as acceptance of others' ways of thinking and doing, or just being connected to the global community and feeling a sense of responsibility to its members. Generally, international mindedness is about putting knowledge and skills, so those two things together, to work in order to make the world a better place through this empathy, compassion and openness. And international mindedness contains 3 attributes, as you can see in the middle, that can help those two learners on the slide being quite far away from each other to come closer in many aspects. And in a moment, I will tell more about the attributes, but I would like to recall Dalai Lama, who refers to international mindedness as a oneness of humanity. And he goes on to explain that nowadays, whatever happens in one region eventually affects many other areas. Within the context of our new interdependence, self-interest clearly lies in considering the interest of others. And I believe that interpreting these words, that the oneness of humanity that can be also defined in my opinion, as a harmony, as an integrity or identity, can help different cultures that are alone or being or lonely find this balance between interdependence with independence, so being alone together. So coming back to these 3 attributes that are really important of international mindedness that will help the students to come closer to each other, can be defined in three terms. So multilingualism, intercultural understanding, and global engagement. And these components are closely connected and interrelated. So the first one, multilingualism, in my opinion, may induce communication. Castellan and Wooden describe multilingualism in terms of speaking, of course, and learning in more than one language, including languages for academic purposes. Of course, mother tongue language is really important here in this multilingual abilities because it's linked to a learner's ability. And it's quite obvious, but it's worth to mention that learning a language is one of the best ways of learning to recognize the word and to communicate with others, to see how other and otherness inhabit it. And the second attribute, called intercultural understanding, may induce cooperation. And this intercultural understanding is closely linked with learning the language. And it's developing knowledge of other cultural groups, the appreciation of different ways of being and behaving, and developing these positive attitudes of others. And this knowledge that is gained during the education process or learning process, knowledge of self and the other, and also this the possibility to take the interaction, the possibility to develop the skills to interpret, to relate, to discover, and to interact very often provokes cooperation with the attitude of this curiosity and openness and awareness and action taking. And the last one attribute, the third attribute of international mindedness, global engagement, may induce, I would say, compromise and can be defined as understanding as well. And it's closely related to the idea of making the world a better place by some activities, of course, in the classroom, but mostly outside the classroom. So for the community, local community, and far away as well. So these three attributes of international mindedness with three C's of communication, cooperation, compromise can bring different cultures closer a little bit together. So the whole school community can be alone together. So they can meet, they can communicate, and they can just be or be together. Yes. So meeting of different cultures, being closer to each other and connecting to the global world is possible. And the education, precisely the school, is the obvious place where different background that holds different views can coexist. And according to Haywood, international mindedness has 5 characteristics that all children need. And it's a curiosity and interest in the human and physical geography of Earth. This is also an openness to different cultural approaches, so the so-called tolerance, a scientific understanding that the Earth is valuable and common to everyone. And for me, this is the most important awareness that people are interrelated, wherever you want it or not, and respect for different cultural background. More and more studies have been conducted on the international mindedness, especially by the researchers and teachers being interested in international programs, education, mainly IB. And one of the studies I came familiar with while preparing for today's presentation was conducted with students of IB school at the primary and diploma level. And students were asked, among many questions, to define what the international mindedness is. And one of the students answering to that question said, "It makes me feel like part of the world." And this statement reassured me that the value of international mindedness, as Dalai Lama said, the oneness of humanity, is extremely necessary in bringing together alone cultures. So I believe that there is no way, no other way, just to see education as the key. Because it's through educational experience, the students can develop a sense of international mindedness, which gives them the competences to exercise and influence on problems facing the world and help them to come closer to each other a little bit more. And what Katarzyna Wrońska said, that without school or education, we will be weaker. And the possibilities to will have less possibilities to communicate and to meet. So it will be very, very limited. So the school, I think, is the key. The education is the key. So hence developing internationally minded students is more crucial than ever to maintain this peace and ensuring a better world to live in. For sure, globalization is demanding international mindedness in the curriculum, but not only to appreciate differences, similarities, or development of tolerance and empathy, but also to appreciate diversity in other people. And I think the sentence I would like to say in a moment is quite obvious, but I think it's worth to mention that we all have a right to be different, but that does not stop us from living together. And we need to build knowledge and understanding of cross-cultural ways of thinking that will lead us to trust between us. And to sum up, I would like to say that in this horrible time of war, where there is an increasing need to stand up for others and to act to alleviate suffering and misfortune, such medium for bringing not only along cultures, but also people in need are schools and their teachers and educational programs that, in my opinion, sometimes need to be reconsidered and reshaped accordingly to this dynamic world. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Said really interesting ideas about international education programs, and particularly echo that really kind of passionate ending about the importance of education and how education can help both in terms of kind of inclusion for children and different cultures, but also particularly in the current context as well. So that brings us to the end of our talk today, and we have a little bit of time left for questions. So if anyone has any questions for the speakers, please do feel free to raise your hand or to use your microphone. Said what struck me when I was listening to those, both as kind of the title for the session said, the different perspectives, the different aspects of links between education and solitude, but also I think an ongoing thread throughout the talks that we were hearing was about the relationship between the self and others, in terms of maybe how to be with others, but also kind of the other beyond the human and kind of the other within a marriage as well, another person, how that kind of works in terms of goals as well. And a few kind of threads drawing those sessions together. So yes, we very welcome any questions that anyone might have for the speakers.
This is, can you hear me?
Yes, please do.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment on what Barbara had just shared. It's a very exciting discussion about your experience and perspective. Just a quick comment on this notion that I was a bit more familiar, which is close to what you've mentioned as international mindedness. There was a concept that I was reading about, and it was from a scholar called Michael Byram. In his works in 1997 onward, he wrote about this intercultural competence. He called it intercultural competence, which he identified or defined as cognitive, affective, behavioral skills leading to appropriate communication. That's how he, and over the years, I think people come in and join, and the concept evolved into different ways of calling it, but I think these are interrelated. And it's very interesting what you described. It's so similar, just a thought, and yeah. Very quickly, another thing I noticed is people use some of these concepts quite interchangeably, and I struggle myself to identify the differences. Global education, international education, intercultural education, and cross-cultural education. Sometimes when I read things about these areas, they are very similar. And myself, I struggle. I don't know if you have the same feeling. Barbara?
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Yes, there are so many, words to say about international, being international. So intercultural. It's sometimes ambiguous and hard to define. And I think there is plenty of work about it, and we are defining this I think, from our perspective very often. Yes, it's how we perceive it. But I agree with you. It's plenty of it, and it's hard sometimes to find out which one is. Yeah. We cannot hear you, Amy.
Apologies. I can see that Anna has her hand up for a question.
Yes, hello everyone, and I'd like to thank you for the very interesting session that evoked a lot of thoughts in my mind, and I like all the presentation, but I have two questions, one for the first speaker and one for the last. I wonder what is Kasia Wrońska opinion of you said that it is important nowadays what we do for others, not only for myself. And I wonder what you think about that, that if we are involved in doing different things for other people, we also do something for ourselves, as our activity has, let's say, return effect, that what I do for the others, at the same time, I do something for myself. It depends if it is good, it is bad, but it also has an effect on myself. And it is one question, and another one is for Basia Żakowska. But I would like to know your opinion about barriers we have bringing the culture together, because listening to your presentation, I realize how many things all over the world we do to bring cultures together, and we still face the problem that we find against each other, not we cooperate, obviously not not in each area, because we have an example of very nice cooperation here, but we still fight. And I wonder what's your experience or maybe research on barriers on in this bringing culture together.